Three, two, one, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in a DeLorean? Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly, the podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly?
Hello.
Hello, how are you? How are you feeling? Last time we spoke, you were having a little coffee thing going on.
Yeah, I had a bad one. I caught a lung thing. I think most people call it a cold virus, but I'm calling it a lung thing.
Ooh.
It was kind of rough there, but now I'm good. I'm great. I had a summer cold. You know how that is.
Summer colds just suck.
It's not even supposed to happen, but somehow it does.
No, I mean, I don't know why,
Yeah.
like, colds in general are never fun, but there's something about a winter cold where it's like, all right, fine, I'm like snuggled in the blanket, I'm, having my hot tea. I'm like having hot tea when it's 80 degrees out, it's just no fun.
No, yeah, that's not what you want to do.
No.
You want to have some AC. You don't want to have a cold.
Yeah.
But no, everything's good. Just before doing this, I was on a Nova podcast talking about building stuff. I got to nerd out in a different way and talk about all the wonderful experimental stuff. That's why I'm wearing my nerdy shirt.
Ooh.
This is from the High Performance Computing Conference I attended last year. So
Nice.
35th year. So I was kicking it with the engineers.
I appreciate all of your different levels of nerdery.
So what are we going to talk about today, my dear friend?
Well, we are actually going to mix things up a little bit. We're going to talk about a classic. We are going to talk about the James Bond film Goldfinger, which came out in 1964. It's the third James Bond movie. But we thought that we would mix it up. So usually, our format, right, is we pick one device or one sort of conceit, and then Hakeem will talk about the science of it, and does that fly? I'll talk about the story world that they've built, does that fly? And then we'll sort of get into a larger third question about the vibes of it all. Today, we are going to do 3 little mini topics where we'll do like a little bit on each one, science story, and then at the end, we'll wrap it up with that larger question.
Yes. And let me tell you, talk about the old days. This was a walk down nostalgic lane for me. I watched Goldfinger when it was somewhere between the ages of 9 and 10. And, I watched it with my childhood best friend and hero, Darren Brown. And I just remember being mind blown by, the stuff the car could do, the James Bond tech.
Right.
James Bond was the coolest dude on earth for me at that time, man. And that's saying a lot because, Sly from Sly and the Family Stone was still around. Sugarfoot from the Ohio Players. There was cool cats. So you're like, who was that?
Right. I'm like, okay, sure. No, Sly and the Family Stone, I know. Sly and the Family Stone, I know. I don't know the second person you talked about, but...
Some of you might be inspired to go listen to some Sly and the Family Stone, but the one person in the band, because it's not just Sly singing, the whole group sings. There's a woman who shouts things, sing a little song, and I love her, man. She is dope.
Getting back to our topic today, Goldfinger, that was really the first Bond movie that had an iconic song for the opening credit and then set that up as a convention for the Bond movies.
Beware of this heart of gold. This heart is cold.
Yes, and those titles, I didn't realize that they were titles of the books. Things like Live and Let Die,
Yeah. For folks who don't know, so most people may know that the Bond movies are based on books by Ian Fleming. This one, I want to say Goldfinger was his 7th book, but I might be off about that. But it was the 3rd movie that they adapted. And unfortunately, he actually passed away a month before the movie was released. So he never actually got to see it, this one. Yeah.
Wow, that is something. Now, look, so, my job here is to talk about the tech and James Bond's tech. And let me just talk about this movie. So talk about a trip down memory lane. We're going to talk about this more maybe in the 3rd section, but there was so much wrong. And I'm not talking about the specific things we're talking about. Like, for example, there's a scene where the car goes over the cliff,
Yeah.
before hitting anything. It just goes over the cliff and instantly explodes into flames. I'm like, what? What? They don't make them like they used to. Like, how do you explode before hitting anything? And why get completely engulfed in flames instantly? And another thing that they did that I found really interesting is like, I feel like sometimes you can get a sense of how the creator thinks of the audience. Okay. And there were certain things that worked really well, but they were like, we're going to make it very obvious what we're saying here. And they kind of like I don't remember the examples right now, but they would over just to make you not miss what they're saying. They would overdo it. And I like some of them left in that, it's like a dessert. I don't like it too sweet. I
Right,
like,
right, okay, all right.
yeah, I like it subtle. And speaking of too sweet, I had cream of wheat this morning and it was too sweet.
What? Okay.
So I couldn't eat it.
I don't know I don't eat cream of wheat. How does one make that too sweet? Is it what you add to it? Do you add sugar to it?
Yes. You add sugar, butter, and like I add a bit of evaporated milk and
Okay.
I turn it to this like warm and mama's bosom as a 7-month-old is how you feel. Like I'm just like cuddled up on mommy's bosom. Oh. All right. So our audience is like, what are these two doing? What are they
All right,
talking
back
about?
on topic. All right, the first thing
Yeah.
we are going to talk about, first thing we're getting
Yeah.
into today is gold paint. There is the iconic scene at the beginning, towards the beginning of the movie, where a lovely lady that Mr. Bond is spending some intimate time with, he wakes to find her, or comes back into the room to find her completely covered in gold paint, and this has killed her. And again,
Yes.
also I do want to say, I'm guessing folks have seen this movie by now since it's from 1964. But if you have
Yeah.
not and you don't want us to spoil anything, hit pause, go watch it, and then come on back and listen to or watch the rest of the podcast.
All right, so this is going to get, I don't know if we should get a rated R for James Bond for this podcast episode because he gets racy. Because you failed to mention, we know she's covered in gold paint because she's lying nude on the bed. James Bond walks into the room because he's been knocked out, and so I'm just talking about this one little thing. When the lady, the good looking lady, shows up, something's about to go wrong.
That's true.
Yeah.
The character's
So,
name is Jill Masterson, and she's played by Shirley Eaton.
Yes, and they claim so when James Bond reports back to his superiors what happened to her, because he was supposedly watching the villain of the film, Mr. Goldfinger himself, and she was attached to Mr. Goldfinger, and she ends up dead. He explains that she died from skin asphyxiation. Wow, there's a little bit of biology here and anatomy going on. Like, what does he think? Are humans amphibians? Because, like there are, or insects who, you ever heard that if you get a tick on you, paint it with fingernail polish and it'll release because it breathes through its body?
No, but is that true?
Doesn't sound true to me because I did it to a tick because, you got ticks down in Mississippi. Didn't work. I ended up pulling that sucker out. And of course, when you pull it out, sometimes the head remains in. And yeah, so I'm probably got a few tick heads still in me somewhere. So anyway, this idea of skin asphyxiation suggests that somehow humans breathe through our skin. Because he says that, if you leave a patch on the back, it's okay. Because circus performers, because that's what he said. Yeah, circus performers sometimes get it. But, if you leave a skin and a patch of uncovered skin in the lower back, it would be okay. But she was completely covered in gold paint. Yeah.
I can tell which way this is going.
Yeah. Well, look, I've been on Hollywood Boulevard. You see the cats that are covered in now it's not over their entire body, right? You only see a little bit of exposed skin, and then there's a lot of clothing that's painted. And I was in Cancun, Mexico. Or was it Indonesia? It was somewhere, but there were street performers who were, who when the cars stop at the stoplight, I think it was Mexico. They're completely covered in this. Maybe it was Mexico and Indonesia, but they were completely covered in paint. And the first thing I thought about was like, yo, is that safe for you? So The real danger is toxicity.
Yeah.
There are chemicals in those paints that could lead to a very definite negative health outcome, not necessarily instant death.
No, but
Because
that's the story. Do you know the story about the original Tin Man from Wizard of Oz?
I recall that there was something like that. What is
Yeah,
the
so the
detail?
original
Yeah.
Tin Man was supposed to be played by Buddy Ebsen, and the paint that they used to paint his face, because he's only painted from the Tin Man's like it's his face and its neck, and then the rest of it's costume. But it had he had a reaction, he had a respiratory reaction to the aluminum powder that was in the paint. And so he actually had to leave, and Jack Haley came in and did the role. And obviously they changed the paint mixture. So yeah, so it's exactly the toxicity issue that you're talking about. It wasn't I'm covered in paint, I can't breathe issue.
Right, right. And I wonder, skin asphyxiation. What about your nose and mouth? How can you asphyxiate?
Well, bottom
I
line,
covered all my skin, but I still got my nose.
well, right. So like the bottom line, just to like clarify here, so the science of this is that in very simple terms, and like tell me if I'm getting this right, like we don't breathe through our skin. We breathe through our
No.
nose and our mouth. Our skin is used as a way to release heat through sweat.
Right.
So
Exactly.
scientifically then, would you say that like it's not a breathing problem, but if you were covered in a paint, it could lead to like overheating, which could cause health problems? Is
Yeah.
that?
It could lead to a thermal regulation issue.
Yeah.
If you clog the pores, your sweat
Mhm.
glands are clogged. You can't do evaporative heating. If it's very thermally insulating, you could have a rise in your core temperature. But the devil, again, is in the details, right? It's almost like those emergency blankets that they give you that are metallic, right? So basically, what you're doing is you're holding in your own body heat. You're not letting it go to the atmosphere, so you stay warmer. Yeah, so you could have that sort of an issue. But as far as skin asphyxiation,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just gonna stop beating around the bush. That don't fly. But there are ways to kill people by putting stuff on their skin. Like I saw one episode where there was a couple, not episode, but a news clip where there was a couple that were fighting. And I think it was the woman or the guy, one of them poured bleach on the other. And that killed the person. They didn't ingest the bleach.
Yeah, no, I would think that would like dissolve things. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So the science of the gold paint does not fly as a
Does not
murder
fly.
weapon. From a story
Yeah.
perspective, it's interesting, right? Because you have, again, this is the beginning of the movie. You have a situation, the setup of it is that, Bond has caught Jill helping Goldfinger cheat at a card game and ultimately seduces her away. And then he thinks he's getting away with something. And when he walks in and finds her covered with this gold paint and killed that way, it lets you know a couple of things story-wise. Like it lets you know that our Goldfinger is a formidable enemy, that James Bond is going to have to really be on his game because he didn't get away with something. And it also just tells you, like, it immediately launches you into this larger than life character of Goldfinger, because he didn't just like kill the girl or get rid of her. No, he went to the extent of having her painted gold and, left as a very, very clear message. And you understand now, like, his obsession with gold. So as crazy and far-fetched as it is, I would have to say that it actually does fly story-wise because of its placement. I'm not saying that it's believable as like a killing thing, but because, well, two things.
Right.
Actually, wait, let me take that back. So because of its placement in the story, it suddenly gives you a lot of information without any exposition, without having to say, Goldfinger is a formidable enemy. Goldfinger is obsessed with gold. Like you just see this thing and suddenly you understand a whole lot about the characters. And so that's the story world we're being launched into.
How do you do it? So suppose you wanted to murder me by painting me gold. How do you get me to stand still?
If I would imagine, I mean, they don't explain any of this in it. I would imagine that they probably gave her some kind of like instant tranquilizer that just knocked her out and then painted her. I mean, what I can tell you is I read some behind the scenes stuff that Shirley Eden, the actress, talked about. And she said it was actually like getting painted was very pleasant. They basically sort of took this paintbrush and it was kind of like a spa experience. And I have certainly like gone into, I've certainly had spa treatments where like they're painting mud on your face and things like that, and it's very pleasant. But the other thing that I was going to say is I think we need to keep in mind the time that this was happening, right? So this movie came out in 1964. And when you read again a little bit more about what was going on behind the scenes, they actually had a doctor on standby on the set while they were doing this. And they took precautions to leave an unpainted space on her body. So we now know that the science doesn't fly on this by, our knowledge in 2024. But back when they were making this, they actually were worried that it could cause a health problem. So if you think about when it's made and that time, then I have to say it does fly because they really did actually think this was,
They did believe that.
yeah, they did
Yeah,
actually
and I
believe it.
wonder if that was influenced by the Tin Man.
It launches us in and it brings us into the story in a really great, dramatic, visually arresting way. And then suddenly
Well, let
we're
me
there.
ask you this question. Did you expect to see like just a plethora of gold dead people throughout the movie? And that didn't happen.
It's,
So it was
you
like,
know,
oh, what
that's
happened to the gold people?
what happened to the gold people? That's hard to answer because the movie's not new to me and I was so young when I saw it that like it's
Yeah.
almost hard to like reverse engineer that in my head.
Yeah.
I definitely
Right.
expected to see like a lot of weird things with gold.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know
Yeah.
if I expected to see more like gold painted people, but I definitely expected to
Yeah.
see a lot of weird things with gold.
The weird thing with gold to me was when Goldfinger and Bond first meet and they're golfing,
hmm
and Goldfinger is like, Bond, I know you did not come here to play golf. What is this about? And they've been out there on the golf course. He's wearing golf clothing, right? It's light. And suddenly a gold brick, boom, just falls down on the ground. I'm like, Bond, where were you carrying that gold brick on your person? I think that would, a gold brick is not the
Mhm.
lightest thing in the world. You see someone with a cell phone in their pocket. How can you hide a gold brick on your person?
I don't know, but when it comes to gadgets, I never underestimate Bond. I mean, there's always a secret compartment or an interesting thing, which actually brings us to our next. I don't know if you want to call it gadget or weapon.
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't think you can talk about this movie without
Yeah.
talking about Oddjob's hat.
What a name, though. Oddjob.
hmm But he
Yeah.
kind of
Was
does
that from his
everything,
parents?
right? Like he kind of does
Yeah.
everything.
But Oddjob's hat reminds me of anyone who's ever watched Pinky Blinders, how they would hide the razors in their hat. And
Mm.
do you remember the rap song, Self-Destruction? You're headed for self-destruction, right?
Yeah.
MC Light's rap had that line about coming to the club, cold with a razor blade taped to your collar. So the idea of clothing having slicing weapons in them is not a new thing to Bond. But Oddjob takes it to the next level because he takes his hat and he can throw it and decapitate a statue,
Mhm.
let alone a human being.
Yeah, the scientific
Welcome.
feasibility of the
Right.
blade and Oddjob's hat and all the things that we see it do.
Right. Yeah. So the thing about Oddjob and his hat is Oddjob's hat is something that you could imagine constructing.
Sure.
You have this stainless steel brim
Mhm.
around the hat, and when you throw the hat, it flies, pun intended. But the thing about it is the precision with which
Mhm.
Oddjob wields the hat.
Okay.
That's the thing that is really where it gets a little shaky because he is so precise
Mhm.
with that damn hat. He can, like, from yards away, decapitate a human or a statue. And the other thing about the hat is that it's not the most aerodynamic hat.
No,
So
like I have a hard enough time throwing a frisbee, which is like a flat disc. I would think, the
yeah,
actual shape of like, is it called a pork
yeah,
pie hat?
yeah.
Is that
And
the
then there are
name?
those, I don't know what they're called, but it's
Mhm.
a ring frisbee. You can throw those suckers for like
Oh, yeah, yeah.
forever.
hmm
Yeah. But this hat, the wind resistance would be so high that you would imagine it would lose speed rapidly.
Hmm.
And then at such a distance to have enough speed to go through whatever statues are made of, marble or granite, to go through flesh, I just can't see it being able to fully decapitate. I can see you weighing it properly, balancing the weight in such a way that it flies as they show,
Yeah.
but I can't see it being as damaging as they show.
Well, I mean, so okay, so here's a question about that too, right? So I would think that the weight of the blade would help to actually give you sort of the heft that you need to get it to fly, like just like a frisbee or, a playing card or whatever it might be. But also if the blade is in the edge of it, like how does he not constantly slice his hands?
I thought that too, right? So is there something about an impact such that
Mhm.
it reveals the blade
Right.
more, that you're okay.
Mhm.
But the thing about the how much force it has is based on its momentum, and momentum is mass times speed.
Mhm.
So it is massive. It would be heavy.
Right.
That would help it. And the heavier you are, the less you experience wind resistance.
Okay.
All right, which plays a role in the growth of planets. But oligarchic growth, it's called, where the big ones start to dominate because they're feeling less resistance. When it leaves his hand, if it's a short distance, yeah, maybe you could decapitate someone. But even if you calculate what the speed needs to be to have if you ask yourself, given the slicing ability of it, given the momentum, what is necessary to remove the head off the statue, you come up with some numbers. I would imagine that just achieving those numbers close by would be difficult, right? Imagine if I had a boomerang that was similarly weighted, or just a ring, right? A razor ring, and I just threw it at somebody right next to me, or a statue right next to me. It will be difficult to decapitate. But now you're talking about many yards away, impossible. So no, Oddjob, your hat flies through the air, but it doesn't fly as a useful weapons technology at a distance.
All right, so does not fly scientifically. And I hate to say it, but I think I probably kind of agree that if you really think about it, I don't know that it flies story-wise either. I mean, it's really fun to watch,
Yeah.
but like, so there was a thing I said before about the fact that like I'm thinking about, okay, if it is so sharp that it can decapitate a statue, or there's a really pivotal scene where it goes and it cuts through electrical sheets, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of sparks and stuff like that. So if it's that sharp, I keep thinking like every time he goes, like how does he not cut his hand? And then
Yeah.
also the other thing that bumped me too is, okay, granted, Oddjob is established very early as being very, very strong. I mean, he's a big guy. The actor who played him, Harold Sakata, he was actually an Olympian. He was a wrestler, so he's done all kinds of stuff, and clearly his is a formidable strength. That said, it's also very clear that his hat is like his thing. So why wouldn't Bond is smart? Why wouldn't he have tried to get rid of that and take that from him earlier in the movie?
I was inspired by Goldfinger because there's so much in it
Uh-huh.
that does not age well.
Right.
It needs a remake
Okay.
where you go hard in the other direction. And so I figured out parts of that formula, and I'll share with you
Okay.
in section 3.
All right. I do want to say one last thing about the Oddjob hat, which is that despite the fact that like there are some things that took me out of it with that, I do have to give credit for the fact that ultimately Oddjob's demise comes about because of something that his hat did, like basically, so we see the scene earlier where he throws it and, it cuts the electrical wires. There's a bunch of shocks, sparks that fly out. Ultimately, he meets his end because he is holding on to a metal sort of fancy guardrail kind of a thing. And Bond pushes the sparking, it's hard to tell from I think they're wires, whatever it is, like coils, whatever it is, and electrifies the fence, and that's how he dies. So I did like that piece of it, and I appreciated,
Yeah.
that at the end of the day, he sort of did himself in. So,
Yes.
but I
Yes.
would have to say that like my definitive answer on does the Oddjob hat fly story wise, not so much for me.
Yeah. So Oddjob, man, I love Oddjob the character. I must say that though.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, love the character, but the hat. As far as James Bond tech in movies, that wasn't the greatest example of coming up with something cool.
No, but that said, it is still a favorite piece of memorabilia. It's been,
It is.
yeah, I mean, there was a 2020 article in The Guardian where the hat was valued up to 30,000 pounds on Antiques Roadshow. So,
Wow. It appeared on Antiques
mhm,
Roadshow?
yeah.
Wow. All right. All right. So topic number three. Topic number three from the amazing James Bond
Mhm.
film Goldfinger is his vehicle's ejector seat.
You can't have a Bond movie without a cool car.
And this is a super cool
Yeah.
car, especially for that time
Mhm.
period. Today, you instead of having a bunch of switches, you have a touch screen
Mhm.
or maybe a Neuralink or something.
Yeah.
But the ejector seat to get rid of passengers that you don't want in your, you know, first off,
Mhm.
we cannot really have this technology existing because today, typically when people ride in cars, quite often it's a couple, a romantic couple. And having the ability to eject your partner is something that people would do. And I don't want to see that happen
Okay.
because some partners like to annoy their partner for their own personal entertainment. And I had enough of you. You're out of here.
All right. I'm suddenly feel like I'm getting some coded insight into what road trips with
No,
the family of Hakeem are
no,
like.
that's not nothing to do with me. Man, I was definitely one of those kids though that was always like, why? And talking way too
Mhm.
much. So my mom would have definitely ejected me, I'm sure.
And see, like for us, it's like a timing thing, right? So I feel like like my kiddo comes home from school, she gets in the car, like the last thing she wants to do is talk. Like she's tired from her day, she's done.
Yeah.
How are things? Well, then
Right.
suddenly, 10 o'clock at night, 10:30 at night,
Can't stop.
and I
Yeah.
remember talking to another girlfriend of mine about this, and she, because she has kids who are a little bit older, and she was like,
Yeah.
she said the thing is, like, I know that somewhere in the back of my son's mind, he's probably sort of manipulating me a little bit to stay up later. But I'm
Exactly.
kind of manipulating him because this is how like I find out about his life. And you know what? We never admit
Ah.
it, but like we're both in
Yeah.
it together, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Manipulation is good.
Yeah, it's all good.
All right, so the ejector seat. Well, ejector seat technology in the Bond movie is you flip over the gear shift. There's a red button. You press the button. Top comes off. Seat ejects out. Problematic passenger is out of here. That flies.
Really?
Yes. I mean, there are people, you can find videos where people do things like they sit on something and put an airbag
Mhm,
under it or some other kind of explosive, set it off, and shoot themselves up into the air.
mhm.
I don't recommend doing that. But and airplanes are known to have ejector seats.
Right.
And basically they took the idea of an airplane's ejector seat and put it in the car.
Okay.
If you're not worried about the person landing, right? If you have no concern for their safety, uh, it can fly as an actual technology. You could easily have a car with an ejector seat.
Is there
Blowing off your roof and ejecting a person, that could easily be done,
so
engineered.
so from an engineering perspective, just thinking about like the size of the car and, is
Yeah.
there enough room underneath the seat to build
Oh
the
yeah.
contraption that you need to have enough force to like
Oh yeah. Yeah, an airbag. Just put a freaking airbag under there and just poof, sudden, that
Mhm.
sudden expansion of gas, suddenly expanding gases
Yeah.
do a lot for us in modern technology. A lot of it is explosive,
Sorry, my
but
brain
it
just
is
went to like a
if you're thinking
completely
of,
juvenile place thinking about farts. Anyway, sorry.
should we do the Beavis and Butthead laugh? Gas.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry.
It's easy to engineer. It's something that's useful. I don't know why more cars don't have ejector seats, to be honest.
I mean, that's a good question for the car companies. I mean, I guess my other question too is like one of the things that it made me think about while I was watching it
Liability.
is in sort of the set of things that need to happen for it to work properly, there also needs to be some kind of signal or whatever it would be to the roof of the car that needs to
Yeah.
pop off or go up or
That's right. Yeah. I mean, airplanes do that, right? They pop off the
Mhm.
canopy and then eject
Yeah.
the pilot. So doing the same thing with an automobile is probably easier than an airplane. Now, the one thing about an airplane, though,
Mhm.
is I imagine that the forward momentum, the wind resistance carries I don't know if it's actually the force of the ejection of the canopy, or is it the wind resistance that pulls it out of the way so that you don't collide with it. In a car, there's not going to be that guarantee. And so the way that the roof was integrated, it's hard to see that whatever ejects it wouldn't be more visible, right? Because it just looks like a normal car. And I've ridden in a armored car, and you could definitely tell that it's armored when you just look at the side when they open the back. Yeah. And so in this case, it flies as something that you can do, but it would not look like that.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about the making of this movie, when they, previously, they established in the beginning, Bond comes in, he sees Q, and he's like, "Where's my Bentley?" And he's like, "We're going to try something
Yeah.
different." And when they were first talking to Aston Martin, and they were talking about the ways that they wanted to like trick it out, they had a lot of doubts that they could do this. And so, they gave them a prototype of the DB5 and actually a DB4 that they had to kind of play around with and tinker with. And then, of course, like the very first thing that they did was they like cut a hole in the roof, which they were like, hold on a second.
Excusez-moi.
Right. But there were things on it that, well, wait,
Yeah.
before I get into that, because I feel like I'm launching us into story. So
Yeah.
definitively, scientifically, does the ejector seat in the Aston Martin DB5 fly?
Yes. The ejector seat flies.
Okay.
Literally
Yeah.
and figuratively.
So as I was saying,
Wait, but let me, before you go into that, the thing I want to say is, in the remake, you know who's going to play Q?
Who?
Exhibit.
Nice.
Except his name will be X.
All right. Okay. Yeah. I get that.
Oh, I got more for you. The best is yet to come.
Oh,
So you
no.
were saying the story of the ejector seat.
All right. So, right. So there were actually things built into that Aston Martin that we never even see in the movie that didn't make it in. Like there was a weapons tray that was built in under the driver's seat that pops out. That's how kind of thorough they went with trying to trick out this car for him. And, it goes a long way in establishing this grand tradition of gadgets and cars in the Bond universe.
So here's a question for you. Is it something, because I imagine this happens in movie making. You have this great idea and you film it, and then you're like, nah, cutting room floor. So did they never even get around to filming it? Or
that I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's fine.
What I do know is that they were on a really intense production schedule because the idea at the time was that they were going to release one Bond movie per year. When I think about the Aston Martin and sort of the place that it plays and the story piece of it. So, all right, so there's two things. One is we're specifically talking about the ejector seat and how that works. And so I was thinking about, why does he use it in this particular scene, right? Like there are other places it could have been used. Why now? And so this is at a point in the story where we already have had the death, our golden death of Jill Masterson, like we talked about before. Bond has now come in contact with another lovely lady who he thinks at one point is after him. And then what he actually finds out is, no, this is Tilly Masterson, Jill's sister. She is trying to assassinate Goldfinger because she's pissed that he killed her sister. So they end up becoming allies, and they end up going on this chase in the woods. And ultimately, going back to Oddjob, Tilly is done in by Oddjob's hat, only after Bond has told her to make a run for it. So maybe I'm reading too much into this because Sean Connery is amazing, but like I feel like there's a little bit of guilt going on there because like first he got her sister killed, then he got her killed, and then he takes off in the car. They're racing through the he's captured, and one of Goldfinger's henchmen is in the car with him, holding a gun on him, and he's trying to get away. And so it's sort of this last ditch attempt to go, and that's when the ejector seat gets used. Like it's sort of he's at the end, he's captured. It feels like that's the moment to do it.
That does feel like the moment to do it. But I want to go back to that scene in the woods because the thing that got me about that scene is the car is bulletproof. And here he is behind the door shooting at the guys that are shooting at them. And he goes, make a run for it. Don't stay behind the bulletproof car with me.
Right. Right. So he should feel some guilt because he did not give her good
that was
direction
not
there.
smart, Bond. Put her in the trunk, if anything, where she's completely secure. And,
right. Like that's actually true. That would be a bullet safe compartment.
yeah.
The other thing that I do really love about the introduction of the Aston Martin and the ejector seat and things like that is that this also establishes in the Bond world the relationship between Q and Bond. And so Desmond Llewellyn, who plays Q, has talked about the fact that his initial instinct when Bond, like that's the scene earlier when Bond goes to get his gadgets, when he's given his assignment, is his initial instinct was to stand up when Bond walks in because he's a civil servant and Bond is like this cool super spy. And instead, the director said, no, do not stand up. You actually don't really like Bond because he breaks all your toys. He doesn't seem to have any respect. He doesn't bring them back. There's actually like some tension here. And that sets up this great relationship with the two of them that then goes forward. So
and they hit at it from the very beginning. The two things I love is when he goes,
I never joke about my work, 007.
Exactly. And then he's like, I would appreciate if you return all of these, the car and everything. It's not happening.
No, and it does not happen with the Aston Martin. So I have to say from like the combination, does it fly story-wise, the combination of the fact that it does help to establish this relationship that we then see paying it forward in so many Bond movies. And the fact the way and the choice of when the ejector seat is deployed totally makes sense to me. I totally get it. And I say it absolutely flies story-wise in the movie.
Wow. It seems like out of the three items, we have a tie. And what do I mean by that? We have 2 don't flies. We have 2 does fly. And we have 1 flies, does not fly, does fly. So we have 3 don't flies and 3 flies.
Wait, you count the science, I'll count the story. Okay, so
the science is 2 does not fly, 1 does.
And the one that flies is the ejector seat, the hat, and the gold. Okay, and I'm saying that the gold paint and the Aston Martin ejector seat fly story-wise, do not fly, does not fly. Yeah, okay.
3-3.
3-3. All right.
So it's up to the final one, the final element, the vibe. Man, James Bond, elegant, chivalrous, unless it comes down to you and me, baby. In which case, I'm going to punch you in the face, or I'm going to turn your back and let another dude hit you upside the head, or I'm going to send you in the woods to be killed. But if you're an old lady shooting a machine gun at me, I don't run over you. I just go around. But here's the thing.
Yeah.
I figured out the way to fix the movie and make it modern. And so now, instead of it being all about these dudes, because what was the name of Goldfinger's pilot again? What was her name?
Pussy Galore.
What was that again?
Don't get me in trouble here.
It sounded like you said Pussy Galore.
I did. That is
That's right.
And actually, so that was actually an issue with the censors at the time. One of the ways they were able to get around it was that was her name in the book. So they were able to do that. And then there also apparently was some other kind of headline in the papers that featured that particular word where they were able to say, well, this isn't common usage, so blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. But, the thing about that is that also is iconic, right? Everybody from the era knows that name. So here's the name of the new movie. We title it Gold Pussy. All right? Stick with me. And the villain, instead of her name being Goldfinger, it will be Pussy Glorious.
I don't know that.
You got X instead of Q.
Uh-huh.
Instead of odd job, you have, I don't know, hand job. It's the names. It's all in the it's a Bond film. But
Mhm.
now you have the women as the, so instead of James Bond,
Mhm.
you have who? Jane.
Well, I mean, look, the discussion has certainly come up to talk about whether there can be a female James Bond.
There's a female doctor. Who?
Yeah, I mean, there's a female Doctor. There was a female Doctor Who.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, it was really interesting rewatching this because obviously it's like a relic from another time. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like in the best way, Sean Connery is amazingly charming. But yeah, it's obviously it's a relic. But like, let's be really honest too. Like when they've been talking about who will be the next James Bond, and Idris Elba's name has come up, who I think would be absolutely fantastic.
Even
What?
dudes have a crush on Idris Elba.
Yeah, and like, I mean, the fact that
Straight
you
dudes.
still have
Yeah.
certain people going, no, he can't be Bond. He's black. I'm
I
like,
know,
what?
right?
Like, if we can't even get to that, then the idea of like Bond being a woman, like,
Yeah, I know. That is a thing, right? The same thing happened with the Little Mermaid, and
mhm,
the same thing happened with the Starship Trooper.
mhm.
Humans will human, as I say.
Humans will
Um,
human. That's like, yeah.
yeah, humans will human. But one thing I learned about the movie in my research was how when they looked at the books and how Bond was portrayed, and they looked at the first two movies, it felt like it's not enough humor and it's not appealing to a wide variety of people. And so what I described, my remake idea, makes it funny and humorous and not completely slapstick, because the funniest humor sometimes is dead serious. So you have these elements, you have a dead serious movie, but you have these elements that are just ridiculous, and you end up with some magic.
Well, it also, I guess some of it really depends on what one thinks makes something quintessentially Bond. And if that, and
Mm.
how much you can change that, right? Like, and I feel like, I mean, look,
That's
every
true.
long-standing
Yeah.
franchise has this argument, really. Like, I mean, you look into Star Trek, the current Star Trek series, and I can't even, I mean, we both know there's like tons of arguments about like, well, does this feel like Star Trek? Does this not feel like Star Trek? And you've got the people who are like, yeah, this does. And then you've got the people who are like, it doesn't feel like the original series, but it's not supposed to because it's X years later. So, and if you look at the Bond Daniel Craig movies, there's a switch there. They're a little grittier. You've got a slightly different kind of Bond there that still, to me, feels like it still carries the DNA of the Bond movies. I
Yeah.
actually found, when I was looking into some of the history of Goldfinger, there is a great quote from Roger Ebert, who,
Mm.
amazing, amazing critic who has since
Yeah.
passed away. But
Yeah.
so he wrote, as described by Roger Ebert, this was in 1999, and it was his review of Goldfinger. First, the title sequence, establishing Bond as a sex hound while linking him with a stunt sequence or a spectacular death. Then the summons by M, head of British Secret Service, and the briefing on a villain obsessed by global domination. The flirtation with Moneypenny, the demonstration by Q of new gimmicks invented especially for his next case. Then the introduction of the villain, his murderous and bizarre sidekick, and his female assistant slash accomplice slash mistress. Bond's discovery of the nature of the villain's evil scheme, Bond's capture and the certainty of death, Bond's seduction of the villain's woman, and so on, leading always to the final scene in which Bond is about to enjoy his victory reward, the sensuous fruits of his latest conquest. So
Wow.
that was Ebert's description of the template
Yeah.
that this movie
Yeah.
really, really established. I mean, the first two kind of did,
Right.
but this movie really established in a big way
Yeah.
for what a Bond
Right.
movie is, the essence
Yes.
of it, the
Yeah.
DNA.
Yeah.
And I guess the question is, like, when we look at it in its time, did
Mm.
that fly? And I would say,
Right.
yeah. The question is,
Yeah.
does that fly now? And if you
No.
push it too hard into comedy, does it not become a Bond movie anymore?
Right. Right. Well, if I flip that, not it's a certain ridiculousness, not a comedy. Like I
Mhm.
said, you got to be dead serious, but have these ridiculousness things there. And the thing I like to see, it goes both ways. So just as you have the man who is like, I'm the smooth operator, I could just, like the scene where he thinks that he's seducing Pussy Galore, but she's actually
Mhm.
manipulating him.
Yeah.
And I think that the reverse of that, where the woman
Mhm.
is the one who's playing with the man's mind and manipulating him while he's also trying to do the same thing to her. You can have
Mhm.
that exact same dynamic whereas you don't have to be like Bond where you always end up in bed, because there is a double standard there where it goes between women and men, and how
Right.
to make you a sympathetic character, or someone you're going to pull
Mhm.
for. um I think there's a way to make it happen and keep the essence of Bond. And if anybody has any sort of pushback, it's not the writing. There's always going to be, oh, it's not the exact
Yeah.
race, gender, accent. Like, for example, suppose you have a guy that looks like Bond in every way, except he has a very different accent. That wouldn't fly for people.
No, Bond feels like he needs to be British.
Yeah,
Bond
a
needs to be
French
British. That's
Bond.
just like the essence. I mean, it's
you
double oh
know,
007.
Bond from Mumbai, right? That people,
Right.
a British, they're
No,
connected.
that could be like friend of Bond, but that wouldn't be Bond. Bond is British.
Well, yeah, but you could be British and have an accent. What if you're a first generation
Sure.
Brit? Yeah, right. So
Yeah, that I agree with.
there's
That I
ways to
agree
play
with.
with it. Yeah, but the thing about it is getting to the vibes element of it. You know, the whole techie side of it, the whole
Mhm.
ridiculousness side of it, the whole spectacle of it. I love it.
Mhm.
The male female interactions that are out of place and out of time, you kind of got to go, that was then,
This is
But
now.
here's the thing about that. I wonder how we humans, what the way we've been thinking about things. Oh, cancel things from the past that don't fit today's, this presentism idea. I think that, humans, we tend to sort of be attracted to this static mindset of ourselves. So people who aren't into interracial dating, they're just like, oh, this is what you are. But is it? Nobody's out here representing Homo habilis. Nobody's out, these are, what we think is our identity is basically our recent ingredients. It's not the whole of who we are. Across human history, we have interbred with other human primates, non-sapiens, right? And so we are an evolving thing that changes one generation to another. What's something I realized yesterday, and I hope this, doesn't take us too far afield. But if you compare space and time, all right.
I hope this doesn't take us too far afield. But if
It
you compare,
doesn't.
sorry,
This has to do with
I
static.
love
Let me
you,
tell you
Hakeem. I
why.
love you, Doctor O. Okay, keep going.
Space is heterogeneous on small scales, right? You have difference, here is air, here is a
Mhm.
thing, right? Here's a planet, here is space. But on large scales, space is homogeneous, right? It's just like, you step out universe on a scale of 100 million light years, it just looks like a smooth fog.
Okay.
Time is the opposite. Time is homogeneous on short scales. On small time scales, society feels like society, human feels like humans. But on long time scales, time is heterogeneous. Things change drastically. It's sort of like the game, the word game, where you change one letter at a time, and then after
Right.
many steps, it's a completely different word. That's how it is with human societies. So that's what I say about, for example, faith traditions. If you're going to be like, oh, this is for all time, but yet human technologies evolve, human morality evolves.
Mhm.
And so if
Yeah.
you look, for example, at Islam is proud of the fact that Prophet Muhammad extended the rights of women, but it got stopped at that time around, the 7th century. And now if you look today, people are like, oh, women's rights aren't respected the same way in the Muslim world, right? That's what a lot of Westerners feel. So, what is, very progressive in one age, it looks to be regressive later on. So the thing to do is recognize that we are evolving, and that time for what they were, even though it looks bad for us today, unless it really is something horrible,
Sure.
it maybe, like, for example, I grew up getting whippings. But with my kids, I don't whip them. Like, that's something very unchivalrous. There's something dishonorable to me about it, right?
Right.
Anyway, the point I'm making is,
Mhm.
maybe we should say that's what it was. We can remake it in our time. and I don't know how you deal. The thing for me is children, right? Like, how do you, as adults, we look at that and we go, okay, that was in that time. That's not
Yeah.
appropriate behavior today. But if you're a child looking at it, you don't really have those societal boundaries set up in your head more. You're more,
No, but I think that actually can be something that you end up like, it can be a conversation starter with kids. Like, I can't tell you how many, like, sort of rom-coms from like the 80s and the 90s I've watched with my daughter. And I'm actively pointing out, like, that wouldn't be that's not okay anymore. This happened then. It wasn't necessarily okay then, but it's certainly not okay now. What do you think about that? And, in some ways, like, you can look at a movie like Bond as a same kind of conversation starter. I mean, I think there are certain things that are timeless, like glamour is timeless, the fun of the gadgets, the joy in technology, like this sort of these oversized, blown up characters that are just larger than life and fun to watch. So when you think about, like, did that fly in, the 60s? Like, sure, that's what the culture was. It was very much of its time. Does it fly now?
no.
No, it's a relic, and it's fun to watch, but it also needs to be pointed out that, like, yeah, we don't do things the same way anymore, and we wouldn't make this the same way. You can keep some of the DNA of it, and certainly, I mean, obviously, the Bond franchise has been going on for years and years and
Yeah,
years,
yeah,
so
yeah.
they've managed to do that.
Yeah,
You
they've
know,
evolved with the times, right?
yeah.
To some degree. But
Mhm.
so in terms of head shaking in the show, like I talked about the car going over the cliff and exploding.
Mhm.
There were a lot of times where there was something technologically I was like, no, not no, that's not right. And there's what the social dynamics that we're talking about. Where I'm like,
Mhm.
that's not right. But yet and still, man, this is one of the times where I'm like, the impact on culture was so huge. There's so many iconic scenes,
Yeah.
and I have this nostalgia for it, so I don't even know if I can be objective about it, right? In terms of does it feel fly for the vibes? I have to be open minded and hear what you have to say.
I mean, honestly, like, thank you. I appreciate that. You're an evolved man. But no, seriously though, I think this is one of those where it really does come down to the vibes, and
Yeah,
where you look at it and you go, "You know what? It is what it is. It was of its time.
yeah,
It doesn't, like, make a lot of sense." And you know what? I just had a blast while I was watching it. Like,
yeah,
I was watching it knowing all of those things and going, "You know what? I don't care. I'm just gonna have fun watching this." Like, I'm not watching this thinking this is the way relationships should be between men and women or
what
partners.
about the
I'm not,
technology
you know
problems? That
I'm watching it and it's fun. I don't care. I'm watching things like fly off and blow up, and it's
Okay,
just
one
fun. I
last
had a
one.
good time. I
One
had a good
last
time.
one. One
Yeah.
last one. All right, I got one last one for you that might throw the monkey wrench in the
Oh, no. Oh,
gears
no.
for you.
Yeah.
Pace. The pace of movies back then
Mhm.
was a little slower.
Yeah.
And, so for you and I watching it, knowing what to expect is one thing. But what about the
Mhm.
18, 19-year-old watching it? Could they, if they hear you and me go, oh, yeah, the vibe is so awesome. This is so awesome. And they go watch it while they're on their laptop
Mhm.
and on their phone.
Sure. Well, okay, actually, so that's really interesting, right? So 2 thoughts come to mind. One is they may feel like it feels slow because when you think about the pace of editing and cuts and how quickly things are cut these days, it's boom, 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 boom. And they're just used to things looking visually different, and storytelling. And that has to do with the technology that is available to filmmakers. So that's one piece. But on the flip side, you just brought up, like, their second screening, right? Like, they're looking at their phone, they're looking at the TV or their iPad or whatever. And I have heard stories about friends of mine who have gone in to pitch things, and the answer that they have gotten is, "That is actually too complicated because we know people are second screening. So you need to simplify your story a little bit, because if we put something that complex on screen while people are looking at their second screen, they're going to miss too much." So in a weird way, even though it might be Goldfinger, might be something that is not as robust, let's say, or not paced in such a
Yeah.
robust way as we're looking at seeing now, In a weird way, that might actually work for it because you can second screen and watch it and still follow the story.
That is true. That is true. That is a very good point. Yes,
Thank
you certainly can, because when the juicy parts pop up, you're gonna zone in,
Yeah.
and you're gonna be in the story.
Mhm.
You know, those slower parts are, they're there, but
Yeah.
you can still get it without those. So
Yeah.
you convinced me. Does it fly for you?
I'm going to say, despite everything, despite the anachronistic nature of it, it flies because it's fun and Sean Connery is amazing and it's such a
Absolutely is.
cultural
Yeah.
piece. It flies as long as there is an accompanying conversation around it.
Yes, it does. Love it. Flies for me too. So I say we
Wait,
go.
you know what? It flies with context as a co-pilot.
Ooh, did you just make that up just now?
I
Or is
did.
that a thing?
No,
Wow.
I just made that up.
No, that's dope. I love that. Context
All
as
right.
a co-pilot. You need
Yeah.
that context. Yeah.
Mhm.
I say next time we do Charlie Chaplin and keep going to the past. Let's go to the very first movie ever made with some sci-fi tech and evaluate it.
All right, producers, you have just been given a challenge to find the right
Steamboat
movie for
Willie.
us to do that with. I want to say thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you we want to hear what you think. Does it fly? What do you think of these iconic scenes, these iconic gadgets? Do you have a favorite Bond movie? We'd love to hear about it.
And what about my remake idea?
And what do you think of Hakeem's remake? And who would you like to see as the next Bond? Who do you vote for?
Ooh, Idris Elba or Beyonce.
I mean, they both make amazing Bonds. How do you even choose? All right. Thank you, everyone. For more Does It Fly, we have a new episode that drops every Friday. You can watch here. You can listen on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. And for more on Does It Fly, you can always check us out on socials at Does It Fly Pod or at doesitflypod.com for a deeper dive into some of the science and story elements that Hakeem and I have shared.
Yay.